Okay, so I'm going to talk about kind of serializing, but also non-serializing stuff. So I don't think I have to introduce serial verb constructions again and again, like we've all heard about this. And that's why I'm going to talk about non-serializing things. But first, what do we understand of resultative constructions? So resultative constructions are, well, you can say cross-linguistically, they have to have the following conceptual structure. You need to have something that causes something else to become something else. So I use them X, Y, and Z here. And it's a lot better with examples, of course. So something like the robber shot him dead. You need to have the agent, the robber. Then you need to have the causing verb, shoot. You need to have the undergoer or someone or something that the action happens to, which is him. And you need to have the effect. The effect, that can be a verb or an adjective. I'm going to explain this later. And that would be dead here. So we've got these X, Y, and Z, and you need to have these three components, basically. So also these other examples, he hit the nail flat is a very typical example of a resultative construction. And why did you paint my fence green? You can see actually the patterns are the same, just the constructions might be a bit different. We suggest that there are at least three possible syntactic solutions to this structure. Well, of course, there are more if you include word order. But we just ignore the word order for the moment. And we say that there are at least three types of these constructions. So you have the agent, then you've got the causing verb, and you've got an object. And then you've got the adjective or adverb, which is something you find in English, French, and German. These are usually non-serializing languages. You also have stuff in serializing languages like B. We've got an agent, you've got the first verb, you've got the second verb, where the second verb is the affect verb, and you've got the object. That's something you find in Chinese, bislama, tok bisin, for example. And then C has something that we find quite rarely in couple of languages, so Vurës might be one of them. I found one structure like this in Pamis, but we've seen like Pamis has a lot of different structures too. So I'm not going to talk about this, and rather talking about Vurës. Resultative constructions in serializing languages, well, we know have been described quite extensively actually. So we know that the first verb must be a transitive because it introduces the agent and also the undergoer, so the O. And the second verb must be intransitive or something like a stative adjective, which are often the same in a lot of languages, because it can only code the subject, so the undergoer. So you actually have a transitive first verb and an intransitive second verb, and together they are something like a result clause. Here's some examples from Mandarin Chinese. We can really see what's going on. So Mary painted the fence white, the wall white. You've got paint, be white, which like together form something like a serial verb construction. You've got a first verb and the second verb. One of them is the causing verb, the other one is the effect verb. And the bislama one looks a bit more tangible, I think. You can really see these are verbs, like katten breken. These are two independent verbs. And one of them is the causing verb, cutting, and the other one is something like what actually happens after you've cut it. So it's the effect verb. Both of them are transitive verbs. So I'm going to look at the data from Vurës, a language spoken in northern Vanuatu, actually one of the northernmost islands, Vanuatu, and it's in the southern part of Vanuatu, like everything you see here that is gray. It's a language spoken by about 2,000 people, or like maybe 1,500 to 2,000 people in the southwest of this island. It's a southern oceanic language with a very fixed word order. You normally don't get anything else but SVO or SV. What's important for us is that there's an obligatory marking. There's obligatory marking for aspect on the verb, so we can actually identify what a verb is, which often doesn't really isn't often not very obvious in languages like serializing languages. Sometimes you don't even have any clitics, especially like in Thai and Chinese. But here you can actually see this. So I base a lot of this stuff on the extensive grammar written by Catriona Malau, but also on my own fieldwork stuff. So what are serial verb constructions? We can see there are a couple of points, and we've had this before, we've seen this before. So the most important thing here is that they need to involve 2 or more independent verbs. So they need to be verbs. It's not a serial verb construction if you've got a verb and an adjective or anything, or an adverb. I'm going to skip the other points, but I need to mention them briefly with the examples. So something like I want to go would not be a serial verb construction because one of them is more like a predicate and the other one is the argument. Like in English you can say I want the book and I want to go or want to go. As you can see in French, you've got like je veux aller is also like, it looks like 2 verbs, but one of them is rather like an auxiliary or the predicate of the whole thing, and the other one is the real verb. So these are no serial verb constructions. Monoclausal constructions, this is important because something like in English you can get I hit and killed Marzi, but this is more like what's that, a coordinating construction. It's not a monoclausal thing. It must be productive, so you need to have, it needs to be possible to modify these verbs also. Like English, some people say go jump in the lake is a serial verb construction because you have go and jump, but you can't say something like I jumped into the lake or something like that. It doesn't work. And the 5th point is, I find that pretty useless actually. Like why do the verbs need to share at least one argument? I mean, if they fulfill all the other points, they already share one argument usually. I know there's a very marginal thing like this in what Alex has described, but maybe these are no serial verb constructions after all. We're going to look at this. So the alignment in serial verb constructions is pretty different. So sometimes you just get a plain construction with one verb and another intransitive verb. So he went down to the sea, go descend. Both of them, we could say they have a nominative alignment. I mean, it's just a subject and subject. You also get something like this in some languages, search and find, where both of them are transitive constructions or transitive verbs. So something like he searched and he found it is more like a transitive plus a transitive, and these both align like in a nominative accusative way. Here's an example from Vurës. Le is to move something, which is the transitive one, and rier is also to move something away. It's also a transitive verb. And then you've got these, the resultative constructions, where the object of the first verb is actually the subject of the second verb. This is what we call an absolutive alignment. So it's a totally different alignment, a totally different syntactic construction. And here are 2 examples from Vurës that I glossed the way Catriona Malau would gloss them in her grammar. So vus mimiat means to hit and kill or hit dead, with a duplicant here. And in number 6, chop and break. That's how she glosses it. These actually look very much like serial verb constructions, right? However, we hypothesize that they are not. Just getting back to this again, the alignment first. What you normally find in resultative serial verb construction is something on the left-hand side. So if you want to say I pushed him down, you normally would say I push him, go down. So I push him, he goes down. Or you hit me dead, you hit me, I'm dead. So where the object of the first verb corresponds to the subject of the second verb. But there are also a few languages that use different alignments, like what we find in Samoan, for example. And if there are any speakers of Mavea and Tamambo here, or not speakers like researchers, it would be good to double check this if you can actually get these constructions here. But if you want to say something like, I pushed him down, in Samoan you would say, I push him, I cause him go down. And you hit me dead, you would say, you hit me, you kill me. So this is a totally different alignment system. I'm going to focus on the left-hand side. And to test whether we are dealing with serial verbs here, well, the simplest test is to check whether these are independent verbs, if they can occur as a predicate by themselves. So, bantikbel, in this example, well, we just want to strike out the second verb. Well, this is a possible sentence. You can just say, nimma vanalo, and van is a predicate on its own. And you can also strike out the first verb, and it's still possible. You can say, nimatikbel alo. It's a completely valid serial verb construction. We do this with a different setting, not going and nothing like that, but it's like flying away. Thank you. Fly, disappear. Rap biliang And again, you can strike out the second verb, you can strike out the first verb, and this is still a valid construction. It's a serial verb construction. I think there are no doubts about this. Now let's look at something that Catriona says about resultatives. She says that the most commonly occurring type of cause effect serial verb construction is a switch function construction. We've heard this word before. Eleanor introduced that. In which the first verb in the series is an active transitive verb. We've seen these examples. And the object of the verb equates to the subject of the second verb. So now we want to find out if she's right when she says the second verb is generally a verb that is always intransitive. Well, let's look at some of her examples from resultative constructions in the chapter of serial verb constructions. And she would gloss something like this example, ser war with like the first verb being tear and the second verb meaning break, but a transitive breaking, like I break it. We just do the same test again. I don't think I need to strike out the second one because it's pretty obvious that the first verb is a verb here because it takes the clitic. Let's strike out the first verb. Well, this is different. This is not what we've seen before. But we could say, okay, maybe it's not a transitive verb actually. It could be an intransitive verb, right? War could be an intransitive verb meaning break. Well, if we do it like this, it's also not right. So you can't say the cloth broke just using this kind of verb thing. What you actually have to do is you need to derive it. You need to say Rob momo war, where the second more, fortunately they look very much the same, but they are two different things. So the first one is the perfect marker, and the second one is what we call a verbalizer. Catriona calls this an anticausative marker, but an anticausative marker means that, well, would mean that this war is a causative verb, but it's actually not a verb. We suggest that these are no verbs, like war is not a verb, but it's more something like we could say an adverb or a particle or anything like that. I'm going to introduce the next term in a minute. It's something that means apart. Okay, how about this? It's the same darlet. It's just the same construction. We try the same. We strike out the first verb. This doesn't work. We strike out, we try the same construction again as an intransitive verb, break. No, this doesn't work. We have to derive it again. So in order to get an intransitive verb meaning break, you need to say millet. You have to derive it with the same more prefix, but with vowel harmony. Okay, we call these underived resultative stems. As you can see, the second element is not a verb. It's something we call a resultative stem. And they are underived. They can just be used as they are as the resultative stem. Yeah, and the difference between war and let is, well, you could say it's marginal in English, but Alex has suggested that the difference is crosswise and lengthwise broken or apart. This is something that still needs to be tested in Vurës, whether this is true, and this is part of my next fieldwork actually. Then we've seen the underived resultative stems. Now we've got derived resultative stems too. If you see something like this, he stomped the cat to death. Most people would just say, oh, this is a serial verb construction. You've got the verb, and you've got a reduplicated second verb. Fine. I mean, yeah, I'm sorry about these examples. They're just the prototypical resultative things. Okay. And they're actually quite useful. People can really relate to that sometimes. No, this is more from elicitation. No. Yeah. So if you strike out the first verb here, var, step on, and you try to use this die or kill or whatever in this position, it would not work. It would be ungrammatical. You could say, well, maybe it's because of the reduplicand. You just dropped the reduplicand here. Well, this also doesn't mean kill. It might mean die. What we can do is we can use this reduplicand or the reduplicated verb here, mimiat, as an intransitive verb, like the cat died. Oh no, this doesn't work either. What do we do? What we have to do is we need to use just miat here. Again, unfortunately, the reduplicand looks very much the same as the perfect prefix here, which is sometimes very confusing, but they are different elements in the grammar. You can see the reduplicand is only partial reduplication here. It's not a full reduplication. So what you really have to say is just I mean, you have to use this miat by itself. You cannot use the reduplication here. Okay, you could say, well, maybe if you look at E, we should just use like a number A. Maybe, yeah, thank you. Maybe, why do we use the reduplication here? Maybe it's just reduplication because you do it with several cats, or because a lot of people do that. No, this is not correct. This is ungrammatical. You cannot say var miat in this language. It might actually work in some other Taurus Banks languages. I need to check that. But in Vurës, it doesn't work. Okay, this is what we call derived resultative stems. You need to derive this verb root, miat, in order to get a resultative construction here. This is a similar construction, not just like, this time not using poor cats. Something more that more relates to, think we can imagine, like painting the face white. And in order to say like paint something white, you need to reduplicate the verb, as you can see down there, the intransitive verb, to be white. It would not be correct to say just the paint and then plus the main verb root, paint. Oh, sorry, be white. Okay, what are the implications for serial verb constructions in Vurës now? Well, you've seen this data, and it shows that resultative constructions in Vurës do not consist of V1 and V2. They're actually a verb plus a resultative stem. We term this, well, a result state or resultative stem for the moment, in lack of a better term for this. It's definitely not a verb, and it's also not really an adverb because it doesn't really modify anything. Like, you could say that. It's not a particle, so whatever it is, we call it a resultative stem for the moment. And this result state, as we've seen it, cannot be used as the sole predicate on its own, so this doesn't really look like a serial verb construction. What's also important, what I've shown you before, like in this line, the resultative constructions in Vurës show an absolutive alignment, so which is different from a genuine serial verb construction in this language, which shows a nominative alignment. Okay, so the implication is that resultative constructions in Vurës are no serial verb constructions. However, we find this, and this is a bit of a problematic case. So this is something, so we've had derived resultative stems, we had underived ones, and now we've got zero derived ones. If you see this example, chop, break, again, this is another break thing. What do we do with this? It looks like a serial verb construction, right? And if you remember, we normally just struck out the first verb, and it shouldn't be grammatical. Well, that's correct. If we strike out the first verb, it's not correct. However, what you do get is you can use the second element, this resultative stem, as a verb on its own, like an intransitive verb. So what do we do with this? Do we call it a serial verb construction, or do we call it something else? Well, we know that moed is a genuine intransitive verb, but you don't need reduplication to form a result state for this. So that's why we just call it a zero-derived resultative stem. We're not calling it a serial verb construction because it wouldn't make much sense to say there are like so many serial verb constructions in this language, and then you've got a few of them, you've got a lot of serial verb constructions in this language. All of them show nominative accusative alignment, and then you've got this one thing that is actually an absolutive alignment. It might make more sense to say all resultative constructions in Vurës are no serial verb constructions, and you've got one single construction that is just an exception, and where you can actually use a zero-derived resultative stem here. That might be derived from a verb, and it's probably homophonous. That's absolutely fine, but we think that this is a better approach to these resultative constructions, at least in Vurës. So I'd like to summarize the whole thing now. So something that looks superficially like a serial verb construction that we've seen before, and most of you would have probably just glossed it the same, like because we all work with serial verb constructions and we know how this works. But when you look at it in a very detailed way and you try to really use them as verbs on their own, you find out that it turns out to be something different. We call it a special resultative construction or just a resultative construction in Vurës. Definitely it's not a serial verb construction. What we want to know is about other languages. Well, do they have true resultative serial verbs. We've seen some in Eleanor's talk, actually. So they really look like serial verb constructions. I do have an example from Samoan, if you want to have a look at that, where you do have to add the causative prefix to the second verb to actually make it a verb in a resultative construction. And, well, the further research is that we need to find out whether resultative constructions actually can be called serial verb constructions after all in other languages, or whether this is a special case of just Vurës or in the neighboring languages. So this is something that we can discuss. Okay, thanks a lot. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. There is any question?
Yep.
Alex?
Okay, thank you. Thanks for this talk. I agree with you for the war and lit, which are not verbs, so they should not be analyzed as serial verb constructions. But the examples you had at the end with mut, so to break, you sort of presented this one example saying it's quite isolated, or but actually it's quite. The pattern is productive in Mortlap and in my Vurës corpus. I mean, you can have lots of different. Intransitive, usually verbs as V2, like to push someone fall, so they're falling, without having to derive them. So this is actually the productive pattern, whereas the war and lit thing is the exception, really, because you don't really have only these two guys, war and lit, the only one, whereas this is exemplifying a very productive pattern. So I don't see, and this absolutive alignment of serial verbs is super frequent?
I wouldn't say it's super frequent in Vurës, as you have it like this. Push something fall, I would have to double check that again if you really have to reduplicate it. In Vurës, well, there's a lot of partial duplication going on with the second verb in Vurës, which might not turn up. Well, I've checked some other stuff in other languages, and it actually doesn't really show up in other languages like Vurës sometimes, and also I would like to reread your grammar Mortlap for this and see if you do have this pattern more often. And in fact, sometimes you do get non-reduplicated and reduplicated second verbs. You have both of them. We're still not sure whether the reduplicated one is actually the correct one or the wrong one or whatever, because none of them refer to anything like distributive or like multiple people. So what triggers this reduplication?
That's a good question. I have the same problem, actually. Yeah.
Right.
Of having some verbs which you almost always found
they just reduplicate.
Like it's a sort of resultative reduplication, but which is not the answer. Yeah.
So this is something that I'm going to check the next time. And thanks for your input for this. And I might still revise this analysis at the end. This is absolutely fine. So and I need to double check the other languages too. What you get there. Thank you. Miriam? Yeah.
Thank you for a talk with lots of lovely data, Daniel. Can I just make a small plea? One of the things that I was really interested by is the claim that you guys are making that what you've got is a switch from a very strong nominative accusative alignment to an ergative absolutive just in this one construction. It's a really interesting, way of sort of reframing the whole discussion. I like that very much. But can I just make a plea that, actually what would be really helpful is if we had more example sentences that aren't just third-person singular arguments in both the subject and object position, because in the V1, because it's really very hard to verify that if if do you know what I mean? Yeah. And I'm sure you have that given the kind of corpus of Vurës that you've got. So look forward to further data in this general area. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for the suggestion. Next time I'll just include them. Okay.
Can you go back to examples 10 and 11? This is very, very small point, but is there some reason why the A examples are starred? Am I missing something?
I start them because if you strike out this, so normally they're not, so it wouldn't be starred here.
Yeah.
And when I strike out the first element in 10A, you would get
Oh, I
it
see
would
that.
get an ungrammatical sentence. That's why I put the red
I
star
missed
there.
the strikeout.
Yeah, if you strike it
notation
out.
there, yeah.
So here it's not star. This is a correct
That's
construction.
correct, Matara.
And here
Yeah.
it becomes a red star, saying like,
okay.
if you strike it out, you
It's
cannot
a red
use
star.
10A
Yeah.
anymore.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about the confusion.
No, well, yes. Okay. You
Yeah, and
also
the star is removed in D.
notations like that are not approved of by colorblind people. Just as I don't like the orthographies in the north of Vanuatu that use italics versus Roman to distinguish phonemes. Nobody likes them. Yeah, no, but they did that. They did it. They continue to do it in the Anglican tradition. Anyway, I don't like those.
I totally agree with you.
I have to
terrible.
read these books. I'm not just reading the wonderful things that you young people have produced recently. I'm looking at old books. Anyway, I also disapprove of notations that require you to distinguish red from black asterisks.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it could have
Anyway,
been-
you
it could have been
explained
black.
you
I just want
explained
to
the
make it
reason.
red.
Thank
for-
you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Any further questions? No? Oh,
We can talk about this later, but
Yeah.
in my analysis, so lit and war are exceptional in the serial. If you look at them as serial verbs, then they're sort of a weird exception. But they fit another pattern, which is what I've called post-verb or adverb, or where you have some morphemes which modify V1. I mean the verb. In English, you could have split something asunder. I don't know how you pronounce this, or break something apart. And apart is not a verb. You don't
Yeah.
apart something. So it, and there's actually
this is basically what
No.
what
My
I've
question
suggested
is
here, yeah.
no. But no. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's right. But how you didn't mention that part of speech? I don't know how you. I have struggled how to call it because I've changed my mind. But it's not anything in that is not a verb. How do you call it? Adverb or?
Well, that's the thing. I don't know how to call it, and that's why I'm here to present this. And no one really knows how to call it because some people call it a post-verb, other people in the serial verb construction would call it a V2 or like an adverb or whatever. You find it as a particle. In English, you call it like a phrasal verb. You got all these different things.
Yeah.
At the moment, we call this a resultative stem. This doesn't mean that it's a resultative part of speech. But lit can only be lit and word can only be used in this position. There's no other way you can use it unless you derive it and then you make it a verb. So that's why we call this is a small part of speech, resultative root, resultative stem, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. So unfortunately there's no good word for this. It just occurs in this position.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you do have some other verbs like this, word and lit, we don't. Like, it's only these two. And I think it's all across the Toba languages. You have this, at least in Vanuatu, also Motla, you only have this one thing, or these two verbs. These two things that look like verbs that can be used as verbs, but they actually no verbs. Yeah. Right. Yeah, Manfred?
As you mentioned that it can happen that there is a V2, a second verb that or whatever it is that is not a separate verb, but it happens to be cognate or derived from something that can be used as an independent verb. I think about in Dakie there is a conative marked by a second stem lehe. So en lehe is to try and eat something, whether it is tasty. And lehe also is a verb for to look.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously related, but I would say that the conative use is grammaticalized, but you just happen to be able to use the same morpheme in one and the other.
Right. I definitely agree that lit and word seem to be derived from verbs after all, but synchronically they don't act like verbs anymore and you need to derive them. So it's in some point. They really suggest that they are derived from formal serial verb construction. Well, of course, we don't have data from older languages of this region. So they could very well be derived from verbs that are not productive anymore as verbs. We don't know, unfortunately. And you actually get a lot of these post-verbal things in this language. If you want to say like I found this, use like search and find, suk sjøk, and suk is the normal verb for find, and sjøk cannot be used in any other position. You have to use it in this. So in this second part, and they used to be analyzed as verbs, like V1 and V2, at least in Catriona's grammar. And I understand this. This is like totally normal of a descriptive grammar. You just look at this pattern, like, oh, these are all serial verb constructions. But once you really tease them apart and try to use them in different positions, they turn out not to be verbs anymore. So, yeah.